gonna hide it.
This is not a honey thing for bees. This is like real serious stuff.
This meeting of the Rolling Meadows Committee of the Whole is hereby called to order. There are 3 items on the agenda, and there are no signatories on the public comment sign-in sheet. Therefore, there's no need to move any of the items around. Therefore, we'll start as scheduled with the audit. So, Ms. Gallagher, do you want to start by introducing this one? Does Mr. Krumstock want to?
No, we really just have a very brief, but Ron Amon from Lauterbacker and Amon is here. And at the same point in time, Melissa will just kick it off before Ron comes up.
Thank you, Mr. Krumstock. In the City Council laptops tonight are loaded the 2015 audit for results as of December 31st, 2015. I just wanted to let, for the public's viewing, the audit will be uploaded to the city's website by June 30th. If not a little bit sooner, we then also have requirements to file with state and federal agencies, credit rating firms, and other agencies as required by state and federal laws. I'm going to turn it over to Ron Amon, but I did want to mention that we do have a couple of pieces within the packet tonight. We have the transmittal letter that is in the audit itself. We will have the management's discussion and analysis that will be in the 2015 audit. That's currently under review by the auditors. And then we also will prepare the final, for the 2015 year, the Citizen Annual Financial Report, which is a 10-page summary, which really highlights a lot of the pieces to the audit and gives you a big picture overview. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ron Amon. Ron?
Mr. Amon, welcome back to the chamber.
Thank you. I'm going to go through 2 different things tonight. One, I'm going to go through the comprehensive annual financial report, and the second piece I'm going to go through is the management letter. I think the first piece I'll go through is the comprehensive annual financial report and just a couple highlights. The comprehensive annual financial report is broken into 3 sections. There's an introductory section, a financial section, and a statistical section. They all have very different meanings in our audit world. The introductory section is everything in the Roman numerals, so it's page 1 to 16 in the Roman numerals. The financial section of the audit goes from page 1 to 129. So from there, the statistical section follows, and that goes from page 130 to 169. And a lot of things, I don't normally highlight the stuff in the statisticals, but I do want to point it out to you that it's a lot of good trend information, and it gives 10 years of a lot of things related to property taxes, fund balance, revenues, and expenditures. And then it gives a lot of other information related to staffing levels and top 10 taxpayers, and a lot of good information about the city of Rolling Meadows. In the introductory section, the one page I'm going to point out is the very last page, which is page 16. For the 29th consecutive year, the City of Rolling Meadows has submitted their CAFR to the Government Finance Officers Association and earned a very distinguished award. What I tell everybody is it doesn't do a review to do anything related to your financial health, but what it does do is tell us that everything that is required and disclosed is being done up to professional standards. So to earn that award is a very healthy award. It's a very good process. Once the December of 15 audit is approved and finalized, then we will submit it for the review once again to the Government Finance Officers Association. The first section in the financial section of the audit is the independent auditor's report. It's on pages 1, 2, and 3. The opinion is clean, unqualified, or unmodified. All those words are kind of interchangeable in our profession now. It's the highest level of opinion you can receive from your auditors. It basically means that your financial statements are free and clear of any material misstatements, and it's the only opinion you want from your auditors. So from there, I'm going to point out 2 different financial pages. The first pages I want to point out are pages 11 and 12. Page 11 and 12 are the income statement for your governmental funds. As we work our way across there, I just want to point out the fund structures and what happened to fund balance for the year ended December 31st of 15. Your general fund had a positive increase of $3.4 million. The next fund related to that is the motor fuel tax fund. That had a decrease of $288,000. Your debt service fund had a positive increase of $11,000. Local roads had a decrease of $175,000, and the last group is a thing called non-major funds, so it's a number of smaller funds that the city has. And so cumulative in your governmental funds, you had a positive increase in fund balance of just over $3 million. From there, in the last page, in the financial section, I want to point out is page 16. This is the same exercise, but a different type of accounting. It relates to your business type funds. Your utilities fund had a positive increase of $524,000. Your refuse fund had a positive increase of $22,000. And then you have a series of what we call internal service funds, and they had a positive increase of $1.6 million. So in terms of fund balance and what is disclosed here in the audit, a whole bunch of really positive increases to the fund balance related to the year ended December 31st of 15. A couple other notes I want to make is when I get into the management letter, I'm going to talk about those GASB 67 and 68, so that there might be a discussion there. But as it relates to the CAFR, if you take last year's CAFR and this year's CAFR and you take the note section and you take the section right behind there, which was called our required supplementary information, our RSI, they're very different. The way the disclosures are now required to be done, this GASB 67 and 68 has changed a lot of the disclosures. They've changed a lot of how we disclose the numbers. What I tell clients at this level is a whole bunch of it's really tricky accounting. There was disclosures in the past. They're now uniquely different, but the numbers were always there. And now what we have to do is we have to actually take those numbers and put them at the entity-wide level of your statements as well. So it's a new process. So you know, as much as you want me to get into it and talk about how all that works, it's tricky accounting. It's high-level stuff of how it needs to be disclosed and what it now means. So. And then the last piece of financial information I want to point out is something we saw in the audit, and I think it's kind of important for the board to understand. It's related to your compensated absences. We see a trend going on as we come and work through our audit process. We obviously have my partner Jamie has some meetings. And one of the things is we've seen the trend of the fund balance on the uptick. We also see your compensated absences on the downtick. And it's a unique process that we see as we go through the audit process. So in the notes, you'll see, if you relate that to the compensated absences, you'll absolutely see those having been decreased for the last several years. So from there, I'll go to the management letter. In the management letter, there are no current year comments. There are 5 comments that are carried over from the prior management letters.
So then, to stop you there for a
Yep.
second, the fact that there are no current ones, that's good.
That is a great thing.
That's what I
That's
thought.
correct. Right. What we are obviously required to do is there's different levels of management letter comments. There can be things called significant deficiencies. There can be things called material weaknesses. Both of those 2 phrases are scary. You don't want those, and so your management letter has neither one of those, nor does it have anything that we found in the current audit process that we needed to make the board aware of. So, the first rollover comment from last year is the fund balance policy. This has been in the management letter for several years, but during the year ended of 14. I think the general fund, is that right, Melissa? And there's a management response down there at the bottom of this. But several of these ideas related to the fund balance policy have been addressed by the board. And there has been approvals. And so this comment is going to go away. This will be the last year it's included in our management letter. So we applaud that what you've done and what you've passed to make sure that now you have a fund balance policy related to future budgeting and techniques that you do. The second comment is the GASB 67 and 68, and this is, as I alluded to before, it relates to your IMRF, it's your police pension and your fire pension funds. This comment will go away. What's disclosed and the discussion points that ultimately this GASB has brought to the forefront will not go away. I think it'll continue to highlight certain things. So. I'll leave it at that for now, and we can maybe get into more discussion in a second. The third comment is related to funds over budget. Lauterbach and Amen has always taken the approach, this is something very important in the audit process that we make boards aware of any of your funds that had expenditures that exceeded what was budgeted. You can see in our table there that there were 3 funds at December 31st of 15, and then as management has done on all of these comments, has put their response down at the bottom to explain why each one of the funds was over budget. So, the fourth comment is related to negative fund equity. Once again, this is a comment that we think is very important from the audit process to make you aware. You can see you have one fund, it's a TIF fund, that is has negative fund equity, and then once again at the bottom, as has been done in the past, is the explanation related to that TIF and where it's at. And then the last comment, it piggybacks very closely with the negative fund balance, and it's related to negative cash balances. And once again, you can see that there are 2 funds that have negative cash balances at the end of the year. So from there, I'll take questions about the management letter, the CAFR, or any of our audit process.
So on number 1, with the fund balance policy, under status, it says this comment has not been fully implemented, acknowledging the project, and will be repeated in the future. That means until we've implemented fund balance policies for more funds?
I thought, Melissa, did you have a comment on that? I thought...
We might have kept that in there just because we're looking ahead to other funds, as we've mentioned, like the 911 fund. So there's a chance, in talking with the auditors, we may have said, keep that in there because we might want to just let the board know that the fact that we want to implement other fund balance policies for other funds. Utilities fund is another one that comes to mind. Yep.
Okay, so in other words, yeah, that when we do other things, that might be the final striking from the list as opposed to...
And I think I misspoke on this because obviously the biggest component of a fund balance policy is always your general fund.
Certainly.
And as people drill into some of the smaller funds, it gets very tricky because a lot of times there's either timing issues or there's revenue recognition type issues related to some of the smaller funds like TIF funds, and how much control do you have over those. And so I think the most important piece is to have a fund balance policy related to your general fund. And obviously then we can work with staff to say, do you want to keep it in here, or if a board gives us a direction, if you want to keep it in there to have a fund balance policy across all your fund structure. We have some clients that do, and it wouldn't be that it's wrong. I just think the most important piece of it is to have one related to your general fund.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments on the management letter or questions? Mr. Judd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Excuse me. Kudos to the staff for getting the recognition again. What's this, 4 years in a row? I think it's what he said, correct? For the,
Even more, yes.
even more. A couple of questions. The compensated absences you brought up, do you know about where they stand now? Is it somewhere around 3.7 or 3.8 million, something like that?
It's 4.6 million.
4.6.
Correct.
And that's down from a high of
6.2.
Okay.
6.2.
Yeah.
So
5.2.
I have the last 3 years in front of me, and it was 5.2 in 13, and it went to 4.8, and then it went to 4.6.
Okay. And some of that's 2 reasons. Obviously, people are leaving, and then our our second tier is not adding to it. So we're not compounding our problem, but we're gaining because of that plus people leaving. Correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And then the utilities, I know we talked about this a little bit, that we had a presentation from, was it Baxter and Woodman last year about the funds that, all the stuff that we need to do, but this isn't addressing any of that, correct?
That is, my understanding is, as of December 31st of 15, none of that study has been a part of what the city's action has. There's not a procedure that it doesn't relate to it.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay.
And then I know I through our meeting, I think it's page 80 and 81, if you can kind of help me out. 1 second, I'll tell you what electronic page that is. Should have had this up. I had it just a minute ago. What'd I do with it?
80 is electronic page 121.
And this has to do with the police and fire pensions. So let's just go to 122, I guess. That's the fire pension, for example. Help me make sure I understand this correctly. So based on this last line, the contribution as a percentage of covered employee payroll is 66%. So our pension cost per employee is 66% of their salary. Is that why I'm reading that correctly?
That is correct.
Okay. So if we paid somebody $100,000, it'd be 166 plus insurance for an employee. So if we hired a firefighter right now at $100,000, it'd be 166,000 because we'd have to pay $100,000 to the employee and then $66,000 to the pension.
Yes.
Okay, then
Plus any other costs that go into the benefits of that employee.
right. So insurance
Yeah.
or whatever.
Correct.
So somewhere between $175,000 and $200,000, give or take, for an employee. Assuming $10,000 to $30,000 in insurance.
Yeah, I don't know if, I don't know the true cost of the cities
Right.
for that.
No,
So,
that's fine.
but what you're saying is the pension cost for that individual would be $66,000 based on what the schedule show, yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Okay.
And then I believe the fire, that's for fire, and then the police is 155.
That's correct.
Okay, and that's assuming $100,000. You know.
Yeah.
I think the last contract was 97 or something like that. And then the other question I had is we took last year, and we had a projected surplus last fall of, I think we said it was roughly $2 million or something like that. Is that correct?
At the time, correct.
At the time.
We were looking at 2.1, I believe.
Right, something like that. And we used some of that money for our 2016 budget. And my only concern at the time was not necessarily a disagreement with using that money. It was the timing of using the money. And my belief is that we should have waited till the CAFR came out. So right now we've got raised roughly $1 million extra. So we'd have $500,000. We could technically, based on that same scenario that we had of 50%, we could use, correct? Roughly.
Yes, correct.
So my contention was it should have waited till now to use it. How does you, as an auditor, and Moody's, when they come to rate us, how do they look at that stuff in the sense that, I don't want to say it's not money that we don't have because we've projected it, we're not using the whole thing, so we didn't say, we've got $2 million, we're going to use the whole $2 million. But my contention is we should wait till the CAFR comes out, and that was my contention last fall. How do you guys view that, and how does Moody's view that? You know, should we be waiting, or is that an acceptable thing to do, or is it getting us boxed into a corner where we don't normally, we got to come up with it? It's not a policy per se. Is it going to cause us problems when it comes to getting bonding out for whatever we might bond out for?
Okay.
Are we going to have to do through a whole bunch of explanation for that? It's probably about 17 questions in one, and I apologize, but.
No, I can, if, I'm going to go 3 different ways. The first way is, as your auditor, that would not be a concept that we ever even think about. So in an audit, our job is to make sure that your financial statements are materially correct and et cetera. And so if you ask me that question, my first answer is strictly as your auditor is I would choose to tell you I don't think that way because that's not the audit process. My second answer is the real world of, I get asked this question all the time. And so I get fascinated that the audit and what we do is we live in the past. And the past for you guys, I'm standing here before you and we're 6 months later. And I don't think it's probably realistic to put the city on hold for a 6-month period and say, don't take what we think is projections, but know that those projections ultimately can change with the audit. And with that, I can tell you with great assurances that your staff, what they give us is usually very real. And we have some clients that the numbers and the process, they change a lot. And the majority of times with the city of Rolling Meadows, with where your finance and what we get when we start the audit to when we end the audit, the numbers don't change much. And so that's my second answer, is I wouldn't necessarily put it on hold and say don't use it, but know that there can be some changes.
Which is
Okay.
part of the reason we only did 50%. We don't,
Okay,
if
right.
we have, we had projected 2.1, we didn't
Right.
say we're going to use 2.1. We said we use 50% of it, just in case that happens.
Right. So then my third answer gets into the question about what Moody's or Standard & Poor's does related to the audit and how they rate you, is they understand that this thing is old by the time it's accepted at the board and before they can get their hands on it. You're not going to give them a draft of the audit. And so they know that this is 6 months ago, and here is the absolute answer related to the city of Rolling Meadows is this CAFR. So they take that information, and then what they do is a whole bunch of their puzzle that they put together to give you their rating is your projections. And it's not just next year. It's, do you have a 5-year plan, and what's the 10-year projection? And so their plan is, this is the starting point, but they're already looking at what's happened in your budget that you're living in right now of the 2016, and how is that going to be projected to 17 and 18 and 19? Because Moody's lives in the future, because that's when the bonds, if you issue debt, they're going to be paid in the future. They're not going backwards.
Right.
But they take the CAFR as, that's the answer, and then they work forward from there.
And one other part, and that's something that obviously the auditors and staff talk about, is that Moody's and S&P, they look at the one-offs, but if you have a consistent policy or those kind of pieces, they frown about certain things. But at the same point in time, it's usually staff and the bond counsel and everybody else discussing with them. So yes, they are looking at the past, but they're also looking at your future. And again, as we always talk about, they look at, let's say that they were evaluating us now, they're going to look at the 2015 audit, but they're CAFR, and they're also going to be looking at the 2014 and 2013. They're going to be looking, are you doing those one-offs? Do you have a policy? Are you paying off some of your other liabilities? Are you paying off some of your other bonds? So they do look at those historicals, but they also want you to justify each one of those pieces. So for staff, it's that consistency that we try looking for, and not just the one-offs. So I hope that sort of explains
So I guess,
number 3.
well, I guess my question is would this be considered a one-off for Moody's and auditors, or is this considered a policy that we've put into place using it moving forward? How does,
Related to the pensions?
no,
or-
we projected last October.
Oh.
We said we think that the surplus for the year is going to come in at that point it was 2.1. And so
Okay.
we took $1 million of that, 50%, and said we're going to use that in our 2016 budget, basically, because the argument is we're taking too much money from the residents. There's no way to get it back to them, so we want to give it back to them this way by not just holding it.
Right.
And we agreed on that, and everything's fine. But how do they perceive that? Should we be waiting until the CAFR comes out to say the actual number is 3.2, you can use 1.6, or are they okay with us saying we project this, we're going to use $1 million, now it comes out and we say we're going to take the other 500,000 and use it?
There's no question that Moody's and Standard & Poor's want you, they want to look at you and understand the plan that the city has. And so when you're conservative and use 50% of a projection, they're going to look at that as a positive. If you had a 150% because you thought you were going to come here, but you say, oh, well, we know next year we already have these things in place, and so we're going to, add on 50 more percent, they're going to look on that negatively. So the idea that you had a projection and you exceeded it, they're going to look at that as a positive. And they're going to look at it as a positive that you're conservative, only using 50% of your projection as part of the future until you have an answer.
Okay, so I'm just.
Okay, does that make sense?
And at that point, I think I will say this discussion is complete.
Okay.
Especially when we're finding a very artful way to bring back an old argument, and those of us on the other side of the arguments, of the argument that was made, could certainly rehash our arguments too. There are 3 different answers to that question, and they are all sufficient, and so that topic is now closed.
I understand that. I was just asking just what their opinion is on it. And apparently I was wrong when I made the assumptions or the argument last year. That's where I was trying to go with it. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Further comments or questions? On the management letter, I don't mean to say that you're closed if you have anything else, but I
No,
remember we stopped and said questions on the management letter.
Okay.
Oh,
Anything else?
can I ask one more?
Mr. Judd.
The, just for the residents more than anything, because most likely they're not going to read this, and I saw it earlier, the returns for the police and fire pension funds were less than 1%, correct?
Correct.
And then,
Correct.
correct me if I'm wrong, we had this conversation last year, they gave us a new amortization table, and I remember asking, when are we going to get a new one, and we weren't supposed to get another one for 5 to 10 years, and my understanding is now they're coming out with another new one the very next year.
That's correct.
2014,
Yep.
That's correct.
And they're projecting now 120-year mortality rate?
That is correct.
That is correct.
Unbelievable. Okay, thank you.
Well, on that note, we completely agree. And so as long as we were talking about pages that include the percentages, Mr. Raymond, can you help folks understand, there's this odd thing if you go and look through the numbers. The city council actually made a double payment last year into the pension funds. You look at the amount of money that's there, it's substantially increased over what was there before. However, the percentage went down. Boy, we must be horrible stewards of money. Is that right?
The answer to that question is no.
And of course, I'm setting it up that way. Yes, sir.
Right. So the biggest component of what's happened that as an auditor, our job, because we get asked this in these meetings, is related to the actuarial numbers and what they're meaning. And so you have an auditor, once again, trying to answer a question that is truly in the ballpark of an actuary. But I can give you the answer, is your rate of return. When you have a 7% rate of return and the actuary is looking out there until 2033 in your case, and you have 1 year that you're less than 1%, we all understand the compounding of money theory. And anytime anybody ever looks at those numbers, it's the exponential piece of that is always bigger than any of us ever guesses. And so when you have 1 year now and you have to go to year 2033 and you have 1%, less than 1% as opposed to what they projected at 7%, it's going to affect your percent funded. So.
And certainly there's no doubt that that's the biggest chunk. But correct me if I'm wrong, is there a smaller effect also of exactly what Mr. Judd was talking about, this change in rules perhaps,
Correct.
going up to 120? And the reason why I ask the question is back in 2006 when I sat in Mr. Judd's chair and we were trying to explain to people the state law change that took effect on June 30th, 2006, I believe, that said, hey, you guys have only had to count on a 50% survivor benefit up until now, but now we want it to be 100%. Right. And we lost 20 percentage points literally at the stroke of midnight. And the analogy I was using at the time was, this is like an NFL football game where you're down with 4th and 1 to go, and then somebody comes out and says, well, now a first down is 12 yards. So now it's 4th and 3, and that changes your whole plan. We may not have added 2 yards to the chains, but isn't that a similar impact of this change as well, that the number that they say we have to have just magically went up?
Right. In this process, I find what GASB has done related to what the profession is required to do is affecting a profession like actuaries. GASB, in my mind, should most often be affecting the audit. And to compound that, you have things like state statute. So there's lots of different pieces that play into what that year you're shooting for, what actuarial table you're using, your mortality rate, and then you have the idea of interest rate assumptions, you have ideas of inflation assumptions, you have ideas of your salary increase and your COLA increases within the plans, and they all play a piece of the puzzle. I'm a big believer that you have an actuarial study, and to contribute into the plan, what they're telling you is the required annual contribution is what all local governments should be adhering to. If you adhere to that plan, ultimately based on what your plan dynamics are, as opposed to what state statute is, as opposed to what GASB is dictating some of this to an actuary, you will get to the end wherever it will be, and it might be 4th and 1 today, but they may change this again. And I'm of full confidence in the next period of time, it's going to change again and again and again. And you've already alluded back to from 06 until today, how many times have things changed? And the answer is a lot. And so the important piece is you have an actuary that's telling you what to contribute, and if you contribute that amount, every year you're never going to be exactly on point with any of the dynamics of the plan, but in theory, you will get there when you get to the end of your period, which is 2033.
Thank you.
Yep.
Mr. Crumstock.
Just one other thing, and obviously if anybody starts looking through the audit, and that's something that good auditors like Lauterbach and Naaman, they actually show you the assumptions that are in for the pensions, but starting in this audit, CAFR, you will actually see that those returns are actually listed too. So they only have 2014 and 2015 listed, but future years you will see that grow, so you can actually track that, not just as staff, but that is another of those requirements that good auditors, and Lauterbach and Naaman does that. And again, I apologize, I don't know the number that you should be looking at.
It's on page 85 and 86. Our page 85 and 86 is where those, and it'll build up to a 10-year period of time where those will be disclosed.
Thank you. And that'd be in the 120s, somewhere around 126 or so electronically, for folks who want to look. Any further questions, comments on the management letter? Mr. Prana.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A question that comes to mind as you brought this up, it seems that we have, since we're using the game analogy, we have a plan, but if they're changing the assumptions, does that mean we need to change our game plan?
That's correct.
Okay, so I mean, we just told the folks out there we made a double payment and we're doing great things, and
our percentage still went down because the rules changed.
And the rep
Correct.
over here just told us the rules just changed.
Correct.
So I think that just needs to be out there for the residents, that we're doing what we're supposed to be doing. We're trying to fully fund these pensions, but they're changing the rules as we're trying to fund them.
I completely agree with you, sir.
Just wanted to get that out there. Thank you.
Thank you for doing so. As Mr. Judd did as well. Any other further comments or questions on the management letter? Mr. Raymond, are there any other pieces?
Nope. I'm good.
All right, then you're the lucky one who gets to be released at this
Okay.
point.
Actually, it's going to stay for the second one.
I'm going to
Just-
stay
Oh,
for the second
stay
one.
for the second.
Yeah,
Okay,
but
fair
in
enough.
closing, because I didn't do this yet, but obviously we always need to come and thank the people who make this all possible.
Yes, absolutely.
There are hundreds of hours that your staff dedicates to this whole process, and it started back in December, and 6 months later we're at the goal line. We're on the 1-yard line, and so thanks to Melissa and lots of other people throughout the city that help contribute to this thing. It's a monumental task. So we appreciate all the professionalism and cooperation we get from your staff.
And the council appreciates it as well. All All right, then let's transition to item number 2, which of course is related, the pension item. We've kind of already jumped in a little bit to this, so Ms. Gallagher, take the floor.
Well, it is a good segue. And we are asking Ron to just stick around, just in case there are some additional technical questions that he can also address as well and have input. We prepared a small summary in the council packet, and really I just want to kind of summarize it and then leave it up to City Council for discussion. But as we've been alluding to, GASB, or Governmental Accounting Standards Board, has provided some new changes that we're adhering to. I think since 2006, we've been on GASB number 34, all the way up to now we're at GASB 72. So lots of change in the last 10 years. Of course, they're addressing these types of changes for pensions in particular because of the fact that we are all faced with these growing liabilities. And the purpose of this discussion topic is to really provide some information to City Council for discussion purposes, and also let you know of the upcoming changes for the 2017 proposed budget. We thought that this might be a good segue because of the fact that we're preparing the 2017 budget, and that way that would allow for some time for thought. We did provide in the council packet the employer contribution graph, which, as you can see, has been over time since 2010 upticking. What we wanted to let council know was that while the city has diligently been making contributions, the annual contributions as required by the actuary, there are new changes from the state of Illinois, particularly actuarial tables. Now, previously back, I think for years and years, they were using the 1971 actuarial tables back in 2006 and 2007. Then they updated it the last couple years to 2010. Now we're using 2014. We see probably, as we're talking with our auditors and the actuaries, that there will probably be changes every year. We don't know. It just depends on what the state of Illinois is requiring. And we are all in this together as far as states across the nation. So I just wanted to let you know that there's been a lot of uptick because of the actuarial tables.
And Ms. Gallagher, may I ask, when people make reference to the Department of Insurance, that's the primary agency we're speaking of from the state, correct?
Correct. Yes, I should have mentioned that. The state of Illinois has the Department of Insurance monitoring pension plans and pension funds and actuarial data. And so they are the ones that are sort of in charge of that, if you will. And we have to file our annual audit. We also have a separate piece that each pension fund has to submit as well. There's a lot of monitoring from that agency, and they set that information. On the second page of this write-up, we did provide a graph to show you the net position of the pension funds for police and fire. We are only talking police and fire at this point because IMRF is really not included in this discussion because this is just police and fire. As you can see, we've gridded that out back from 2010 to 2015 to show the funding status over time. And again, new for 2017 budget, the state of Illinois is now requiring the adoption of the new actuarial tables. What does that mean for us as we prepare the budget? That means that we are faced with an additional burden in terms of more dollars for the pension fund. Just to kind of sum it up, we have been at the City of Rolling Meadows contributing to the year 2033 for the amortization period rather than 2040 as required by the state of Illinois. So again, diligently looking out and trying to make those pension contributions sooner and quicker. At the same point, there are some out there in the municipal world that will go at, as state required, 90% funded rather than 100%, meaning you can go to 90%, but it'll take a lot longer to get to where you need to go. So 100% is what the City of Council has committed to. As we have prepared a basic idea, and this is, I just want to put that out there, this is only an idea. On the third page of the write-up, we did prepare. This all looks familiar because this is in our usual or adopted budget, but this is just as an idea. It's not a tax levy. I want to put that out there. It is just showing you the 2014 tax levy, which as it was approved, the 2015 levy, and then we always would put in, if this was a proposed budget, an idea for the 2016 budget. The numbers that are highlighted for police and fire are the dollar amounts that are in the actuarial report for the tax levy. How the council decides to go about funding this obligation is completely different, and I just want to put that out there. This is an idea only, as I mentioned. I did want to put down a couple discussion items, and I know it's in the council packet. Going back to the table, you'll see the dollar increase, which comes out to almost $1 million. 60% of the tax levy right now, currently, is funding pensions. If we were to fund the entire amount from just the tax levy, it's about almost an 8% increase year over year. I'm only putting that out just for discussion purposes. We did put down 3 ideas and food for thought for council, and I'm really kind of turn it over to council at this point. I don't know if you want me to read through the questions or not, but basically, are you looking to maybe look at the tax levy to fund the full amount for the pension obligation? Are you looking at maybe what we did last year, fund it under 5%? I think it was 4.9, so do you want to go a little bit more than that? And then, of course, any other thoughts or ideas. But we wanted to make sure that it is also noted that its staff plan, 2016 is the year that we've done the double pension payment, as we keep saying. That is the goal for the next year as well. There needs to be some headway towards this growing obligation. So with that, I'll turn it over to City Council.
Then of the council members, I'll go first to Mr. Diastis, who signaled that he'd like the floor, but before doing so, I'm going to state as loudly and clearly from my chair as I can that I have absolutely no intention of whatsoever of having a 7.6 increase to the tax levy. I simply think that's just not going to happen. You can't put your foot down without throwing a couple ideas out there. So since number 3 says any other thoughts or ideas, Ms. Gallagher, you alluded to we choose to fund on a target of 100% by 2033. 2040 is all that's required, and people can go to 90 if they want. I'm not suggesting doing either of those things, but what I am suggesting is, could we run the numbers to find out if it were a pure property tax levy issue, what does the 2040 number look like? What does, if that's not enough, and I mean enough of a decrease, what does the 2040 number at 90% look like? And then we can make that the tax levy. I know 5% or below, you guys probably mentioned because that was part of our discussion last year. It's not really my intention to make an arbitrary 5% number. But if looking at the numbers on the 2040 scale doesn't get us below 5%, I'm going to say I want to know what the 90% are. Because then the council can still go at 100% with 2033 as the goal, but then it needs to be up to us to find that increment, the difference between those numbers, without constantly socking people in their property tax, because the state of Illinois keeps choosing to change the rules, because the state of Illinois keeps choosing to hand out the party favors that they don't have to pay any political penalty for, but we get stuck with the bill. And so I would like to ask if you guys could, in preparation for the next discussion, maybe run those numbers. And let's do this. If just saying 2040 might pop us below 5, you can stop there, because that's a pretty big change. But if it doesn't, I'm going to ask for the 90% numbers, because I have absolutely no intention of allowing an increase this big. The council's going to have to do some work for the incremental difference between the two things. Mr. Crumstock, on this?
On this, if you want that number, we can give you that number. Obviously, we have an anticipation. We do have an idea for that. Unless you want us to do a formal presentation on that, we can come back next month, or we can do that right now.
Well, if you know what 2040 is, I'd like to hear it.
The 2040 number would be a reduction of 362,137. It would bring it down to 4.8, so that 7.6 goes to 4.8. The actual reductions in the lines, instead of the 3,220,749, it's actually 3,089,150. For the fire pension, where it said $3,541,622, it's actually $3,311,090 to make that 362. So again, you're going from $978,835,000 to $616,704, or the difference of that $362,131.
Well, then I could be comfortable throwing out an idea like if the levy absorbs the 2040 portion, and the council says we choose to go to 2033, then we have to choose without it just being a choice to ask residents for more money. And we should find that increment maybe in some of these surplus funds that we're talking about to carry through or whatever else. Maybe that's a way to go the step higher without it being on the backs of everybody who's paying. I realize that even our surplus funds have come from them too, but I think the principle is important enough that I'm willing to throw that out as another thought or idea, and I thank you for the numbers. Mr. Diastis.
I don't think my shot is dry anymore. You asked very similar questions that I was going to ask, except I'm
Sorry
going
about that.
I'm going to take it one step further. I think we should change it from 2033 to 2040 as soon as we can. I've said that before. I still feel that way. I don't think we should put this on the backs of the residents, because the state says we have to, wait a minute. Let me find it real quick.
It's all right.
That we have to fund the pension, assuming everybody's going to live to 120 years old. I'm sorry, the oldest person in the world just died, and I don't think she was 120 years old. So I think, as stupid as they are, we need to be smarter than them and change it to 2040 so we don't burden the residents.
Fair point. Mr. Prana, then Mr. Judd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First off, I thought we were doing a good job trying to double up and get ahead of it and do the right thing. And I look at it, and now all of a sudden the state says, well, you got to throw another $414,000 into the police pension and $563 into the fire pension. And even though you were doing the right thing, now you're behind the eight ball again. And I agree with you. There's no way, shape, or form that I am going to go anywhere near a tax levy like that. And the frustration, I just look at it as we were on the road, and what you were talking about, I would love to do 2033, but if we have to go to 2040 so the residents don't have to be burdened, and that surplus that we've been talking about just sort of went whew, and that looks like where that's going to be headed, even though we have other things that we could do for the city. But the state of Illinois has now said, sorry, Rolling Meadows, you did a good job, but we're going to take it away from you.
Mr. Judd.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, I've been a major proponent of 2033 because I think that's the right thing to do. It's synonymous with the 15-year mortgage versus a 30-year mortgage. You can take out a 30-year mortgage and have a cheaper rate, cheaper payment every month, but take a look at the interest that you pay versus a 15-year. It's substantially different. We were making progress, and I agree with your statement, Mr. Mayor, that trying to bite my tongue, the people in Springfield that continue to do these insane things with no regards to what they actually truly do to residents and taxpayers is unbelievable. That being said, they've shown a propensity and a history of doing it. If we think by moving this to 2040 that it's going to go away and they're going to stop, it's not. This is only going to get worse as we move forward, and we're going to dig the hole deeper and deeper. This state is completely behind the eight ball. I mean, you know, it's great how Rahm Emanuel raised taxes, $524 million last year. Nobody knew about it until they get their tax bill this year, and they went up, 13% for, every resident. This stuff isn't going to go away. So putting less money in is not going to help us get anywhere closer to 100% or 90%. All it's going to do is cost the residents more money in the long term. Do I want to eat a 7.6% increase? No. But it's a game of cards that we have to play, that we're dealt the hand. Arguments can be made one way or the other as to what happened in the past, but somehow we got to the position where we were significantly underfunded. There's no reason to continue that path. I mean, we're at 39%. If we were at 75, I could maybe understand it and saying, okay, let's back off a little bit, but we're at 39% and 42 or 6 or something like that for the police. I mean, it's unfortunate that we have to deal with it, but everybody in this community wants the police that we have, wants the fire that we have, and these are all expenses that go with it. We have to pay for them. Pushing it off onto the residents that are going to move into this town in the future, that doesn't bode well. I mean, it's going to hurt everybody's property values if they know that, if you look at it and say, okay, what's your tax increase look like? Oh, you're going to get hammered in 5 years because you're at 38%. It's not our fault we're at 38%. We're putting the money in. This is an argument I made a couple years ago. We're putting the money in that we're supposed to put in. These guys got 0.68%. All they had to do was go out and buy a 5-year bond, and they made more than that. It's insane. But we're stuck holding the bag. But changing it to 2040 is not going to help the situation or make it go away. When, we got hammered by an amortization table last year, a mortality table, we're getting hammered again this year. I would bet a large sum of money. Of course, with Illinois, you never know, but they're not going to come back and say, okay, now next year your new mortality table is 125. But if they do, at some point in time, all these funds are just going to go under and the whole thing is going to collapse, the whole house of cards that's been built. But that being said, it doesn't help us to say, okay, we're going to push this down the road. 2040 is great. We go out to 2050, and we could go, do exactly what Chicago's doing. They've just completely masked the problem for another 10 years on top of it. And I think, if you look at the CPS, it's even worse. But, I think it's a huge mistake. I would not support it in any way, shape, or form going to 2040. 2033 is the right thing to do. It's the right thing for the residents. It's unfortunate that we're in the box that we are. It's unfortunate that Illinois keeps dumping on us, but maybe that'll help the residents speak up to the people in Illinois and say enough's enough. But for us, I plan on living here. I just want the thing to go away, and 2033 it goes away, but not if we change it. Thank you.
Mr. Banger, then Mr. Diastis.
Thank you. When we had this original discussion a few years ago, I remember I usually jot down phrases that we use, and I had hash marks behind "kick the can down the road" because we used that, and I think one of my comments was, we've used it too much. Let's stop doing it. And so, as a result, I haven't changed my mind on this, and I would never vote to extend it to 2040. I think it's something, as Mr. Judd just said, we'll end up paying more the longer we put this off or extend it, so I wouldn't support that either. Thanks.
Further comments or questions on item number 2? Mr. Prana.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If Springfield doesn't have any common sense, they can make the actuarial table 150 years. But I got news for you. A lot of us are not going to be here at age 85, 90, 95, and 100, and I think the actuarial table, after a while, will self-adjust itself, just the way it goes. So I'm not in favor of, hammering the residents. We're just coming out of it. Things are going well in Meadows. We went to 3 grand openings this week. We've got a number of things going on down the road. As much as I'd like to still go at the 2033, I just think you have to look at the common sense, because obviously it's not down there in Springfield, and the number of retirees living to be 120, I think, is, unless there's some new magical drug that comes up. So,
Any further discussion on item number 2 about pensions? Then seeing no further discussion, we can call item number 2 concluded. And continuing our money theme, let's go to number 3 with the local roads.
We're just flipping pages, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We are moving ahead to local road funding. This really is part 1 of part 2. We're going to have another discussion in July as well. What we wanted to do was really just kind of, again, helping craft the 2017 proposed budget and work on some ideas and thoughts from the City Council. And I'll just kind of provide some review and then turn it over to City Council for discussion. I did want to say that the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee has been meeting. We've been talking about all the capital projects throughout the whole city, and our work will continue through July. And then in August, the capital improvements plan will be presented to the City Council at the August Committee of the Whole meeting. In the council packet tonight, we have the just one attachment to this, which is the debt service outstanding. We estimated that as of December 31st, 2016. To footnote that, we do have 2 bonds, 2 general obligation bonds that will mature in 2017 and 2018 that are on the property tax levy. And really this, again, is just to kick off on the funding side, sort of the pieces that we're looking at. In July, we're going to be bringing back on the expenditure side, sort of the thought process and some of the expenditure for the projects. Really, some of this would be review for the City Council and also the residents. We do provide some information as far as how local funding and how the City of Rolling Meadows has provided funds for road projects over time. There have been a diversified mix, which is a good thing. And now in the 2016 budget, now we have a property tax levy where it was sitting in the general fund. Now we have that in the local road fund, $500,000 in the local road fund. We have a mix in page 3 of this document. I'm going to review the revenues for everyone. So in our thought process and beginning parts of crafting the budget, we do this the entire year, but really this is now a culmination of effort, and we brought some of this to the Ad Hoc Capital Improvement Committee. What comprises of the local road fund and how we fund roads is about $2.6 million, and it is comprised of a transfer from the state motor fuel tax fund. That's a separate fund, and we receive a $600,000 thereabouts, an allotment based on per capita. That fund balance also provides for expenditures such as road salt, street light, electricity. So we can't use the entire $600,000 for road funds. We use a portion if we can. This year for the 2016 budget, we did use $600,000. Because of the fact that we have slowly used reserves over time, now we're estimating at about a $200,000 transfer over to the road fund. We've brought that to City Council's attention through previous capital improvement plans too, that this would over time be reduced. We have a county road and bridge levy. We have a transfer from the general fund as proposed. It's just, again, an idea. Bringing in some of those reserves as we did for the 2016 budget. We have a home rule motor fuel tax, which was increased by a penny last year from 3 cents to 4 cents per gallon, which generates approximately $300,000 to $380,000. We, of course, have the property tax levy, as I mentioned, at $500,000. We do have grants and reimbursements, which we do tend to exclude when we're looking at some of these things, but we did put that in this process here. And then we have vehicle stickers, which generates about $500,000. Just as a reminder, the road fund, when it has grant reimbursables, we, as a city, will spend those dollars first, and then we're waiting on reimbursement. So, for instance, in the 2015 audit, you saw that there was negative cash sitting in the local road fund. That means the general fund is assisting that fund until that reimbursement comes back into the road fund. Flipping over to expenditures estimated for local road fund just for 2017 is approximately $3.9 million. We still have some debt service in the local road fund. We have operating expenditures. We have the annual street program, which now we're labeling reconstruction, and then also a piece for resurfacing. And again, the expenditure side will be discussed more in detail in July. And then we have all other capital expenditures, which does include grant reimbursable and things like the sidewalk program. On the fourth page of the write-up, what we did was just as a ballpark, revenue versus over expenditures, show you that if we spent everything such as 2.6, or if we had $2.6 million coming in based on the revenues that we know of, and again, we highlight the transfer from the general fund as an estimate, it could be a different amount. 2.6 million coming in, the estimated expenditures at 3.9. Now again, that could be things that will be changed or modified based on city council direction, based on what the current projects are proposed for the capital plan. There would be a funding gap of 1.3 million. The reason we bring this to your attention is that even if we reduce expenditures, we're still running at a very slim margin. I think those are things that we need to think about going forward. On page 5 of the report, what we did was summarize some of the preliminary thoughts from the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee. And these are just very preliminary thoughts, and really just thoughts for City Council to think about in terms of looking forward as we think about the next 5 years for capital planning, particularly for the roads. So for instance, item number A, general obligation bonds. When we're looking at issuing debt for general obligation bonds, as the city's done in the past, I think the last one was 2005 for road projects, is that something that the city council also wants to think about and look at issuing general obligation bonds for additional road projects, meaning reconstruction? The next item, item B, allocation of revenues or adding new revenues. We have mentioned alternative revenues in the past. There are not a lot of new revenues out there when you think about it. The city council and the staff recommended a 1% or 1 cent increase for the local motor fuel tax. That's been done. But again, if city council wishes to have us go back and do some pro forma or some estimates, we are happy to and look at other pieces. But really, what we've identified is what is out there. The property tax levy, again, that's new for the 2016 budget. And of course, that has already been decided by the city council. It can be adjusted going forward per the direction of the city council. And in the 2016 budget, as in the 2015 budget, there were general fund transfers from reserves. And that is something that staff with the pension obligations really doesn't see as a viable alternative because of the stress that is already on the general fund. But again, that's for city council's direction and policy. And again, I put out there, are there any suggestions or ideas? But we are happy to take any and turn it over for city council for review and discussion.
Questions or comments from the council? Mr. Judd?
I have a question just for a little clarification. We've talked in the past about an annual street program of $1 million. And then I know we kind of went up to 1.3. Am I correct in what I'm reading that it's 1.9 now?
Meaning if you add the
reconstruction.
two items
Reconstruction.
together?
Yes, that's what they're doing.
But is that a change from the past, or is that, I thought we were always somewhere around 1.1 million or 1.3 million?
Correct. So to answer your question, Alderman Judd, in 2015 or 2014, it was about 500,000. In 2015, it was about 1.3 plus, and then this year it'll be a million or greater. Based on discussion with the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee, is the fact that based on the street conditions, reconstruction and resurfacing, there should be distinction, and there should also be a thought process of what we need to do going forward. So yes, there is an increase.
Okay, because I thought that
Yes.
the numbers you're saying are about right, 500 and 1.3, so now it's 1.9.
Right,
So if we
because
went, so if we went to the 1.3, just to keep kind of things status quo, however you want to adjust it's irrelevant, we're still, what'd you say, 1.3 million, so we'd still be 700 in the hole.
Right.
Almost 800 in the hole. And 4 of that comes from the motor fuel tax, right, from 600 to 200. So that leaves us
And 300 from the general.
300,000 or 400,000. Where we increased vehicle stickers last year, and we increased the gas tax. Where's the additional? How do we go another 400 grand negative? I mean, because we're basically 1.4. Take out the 600 extra from the 1.9 to the 1.3, so that puts us at 800 grand. We did 200. We're only going to do 200,000 from motor fuel tax versus 600, so that's 400 of the problem. So that still leaves us 400,000, but we increased vehicle stickers, I think, 100 grand.
We didn't increase it last year,
Not last year, in
No.
2015.
a couple years ago.
And it wasn't that much.
Okay.
We did to your point, we did do a consolidation of vehicle sticker type codes, and there was a bit of an increase, but it wasn't as high as
Okay.
that. So we went up like from 480,000 up to 500,000.
Okay, so minimal. But then there was 100,000, I think, would we say 180,000? Would we end up going with the gas?
Well, it
Because
slightly,
we said it was going to
but
be whatever, and
80,000.
we agreed that it wasn't going to be the full thing.
Correct.
Correct.
Do you remember what that?
I don't know
number
the numbers, but we
Well,
agreed it wasn't going to be the full thing.
Probably
Right, so
wasn't gonna be the full thing,
80,000,
Okay.
80,000.
80,000, okay, so that still there's a $300,000 issue. Help me understand where the 300,000, I mean, even if we go back to this year, you follow what I'm saying? Even if we say 1.3, just like we did this year, and we had 400 additional, which we don't. I mean, I'm just trying to get to trying to figure out the numbers. So
Right,
if we
and
would be able to transfer 600 versus 200, we're still 300 plus 100 grand from the gas. We got a $300,000 difference between this year and last year. You know, well, 17 is projected and 16. Where'd the 300 grand?
It is
where
on
would
the
that lie?
expenditure side. So it's on the expenditure side. When you look at the expenditures, and the Ad hoc Capital Improvements Committee is still looking at all of the projects, and that will be brought forward in July's discussion. But based on the fact, the breadth of projects that are out there, and based on the addition of looking at reconstruction and resurfacing and making sure that the roads are covered, I think as we know that all of the expenditures, some of these expenditures have been deferred over time, and we're trying to bring them into the full picture and not push them out into the outlying years. So
Okay.
that's the reason it's on the expenditure side.
But could you help me? Because you said expenditures, but then you said additional resurfacing and reconstruction.
Right.
That's already accounted for in the 600. Because you went from 1.3 to 1.9. So I kind of took that out of the picture that you're doing additional. So you're telling me the other capital expenditures went up 300 grand?
No,
Am I
No,
am I
no,
losing
you're
you?
confusing things.
no. And, you have to look at the full picture, which are all the capital expenditures. The annual street program resurfacing this year was $1 million. When you add in the additional reconstruction, which we're estimating $875,000, and the city council can choose which direction needs to go. But based on, I think, previous council reports from Public Works Director Vogt, that the amount that should be spent is a much higher amount.
Right. I remember that
So,
from I'm just
in all of the capital expenditures at 1.1 million, based on this estimate here, some of this is grant reimbursable projects that we're doing right now, and that we will be waiting on reimbursement, but that's already factored into here, which is that $500,000 line. So I think that it's important to know that we're looking at the breadth of projects, and it's city council's policy and direction to see which projects should be included and which ones shouldn't
Let
be
me
deferred
just,
or
try
outlined.
doing some of the clarification for you. So if you, and again, we're just doing this spitballing, unfortunately. If you
close
take the
enough.
annual street program reconstruction at the 875, minus that from the 3.9 million, and you come obviously down to 3.1. If you were still to have that transfer from the state MFT fund of 600,000, so that extra 400,000 that you've talked about, that moves that up to about 3.1. So when you try and compare 2016 to 2017 idea in this, that's what I think that you're trying to do.
You're on that line, but my point is we did 1.3 this year.
I know, and I think what
But-
you're looking at and what we're trying to spitball at this point in time, let us run you the numbers, so instead of just playing with math.
Okay. It just
Let's
seems like
just do that.
300,000's, I don't know where it went, and that's what I'm trying to
Yeah,
figure
let
out.
us just do it so we can walk you through that.
But there's no fund balance in the local road fund.
Right.
It's
That's
where
negative
the
from last
point
year,
that
right?
we're starting with is zero. That's my point.
So we might have used some of that for this year. is what you're
Previously,
saying.
correct.
Okay,
There
so
was
that might
fund
be the
balance in the
300.
local road fund. This is starting from zero.
Right.
Okay. That makes sense. At least now I'm just trying to find the 300 grand, that's all.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct. And it's a fair point. Mr. Cannon?
Melissa, could you just re-educate me? Could you remind me why the state motor fuel tax is going from 600 to 200? I know you told us, but I can't remember the reason.
Good point. There's a, then there, with these documents and data, it's good question. So it's not going from 600,000 to 200. We are receiving our full 600,000 thereabouts. It's per capita. We receive it from the state of Illinois. That's going into the state motor fuel tax fund. But there are expenditures in that fund, like streetlights and electricity, and for those streetlights, and also salt that we pay for. What's remaining is then the amount that we can transfer over to the local road fund. The motor fuel tax fund has had reserves that we were able to kind of piecemeal and transfer then over to the annual street program. But now, because those reserves, again, are going down, we don't have that ability to transfer the full 600,000. Does that answer your question?
I knew there was a reason, I just couldn't remember how to
There
get
is
it.
one more clarification. Without really fund balance, a large fund balance in MFT, the last MFT audit that we had, the state auditors were a little concerned about what we're transferring. They would prefer that MFT stay funded with a nice reserve and then you transferring at a later date. So we're trying to be listening to that auditor, but also watching our numbers too.
Now, I'll throw out just an observation, and I want to say before I get answered back that I know it's not a magic wand. I know it doesn't make the problem go away. I know that certain things people have their eye on and are spoken for and so forth and so on. But as we stare at a highlighted in yellow on a white document, the only item printed in red on a black and white document, there's a funding gap here of almost $1.4 million and so forth and so on. With item number 1, we just went through the surplus for 2015 that we projected to be $2.1 million is actually over 3. And we have in our packet that even our diminished reserves, not the full 11 million something, but the 9.5 million that are unspoken for in reserves, that's already more than we're supposed to have by our own policy. And with the help of my iPhone, if $9.7 million is 34.6% of our operating expenses, well, then somewhere around $8.4 million is 30%, which is the very upward limit of our policy, which means, to my way of thinking, we have to push $1.2 million of those reserves out to somewhere. I'm not saying they can all go here. I totally get it. I know that when you use those two ways of looking at money, they're not cumulative. It's double counting some dollars and so forth and so on. But I am just not going to be boo scary frightened into socking the residents again for more money when there are things we can do to diminish this $1.4 million funding gap without having to say, hey, look, for the umpteenth time, you want to do a natural gas tax? Hey, for the umpteenth time, are we going to raise the vehicle stickers? You know what? The sky's not falling. So I'd like to have that observation out there before we go too much farther into part 2 with the capital projects and so forth and so on. I don't think we need to slash our way through the projects we want to do, and I don't think we need to go out there and raise everything under the sun to get us another $1.4 million. I think a significant portion of this problem can take care of itself when we reallocate some of the things that we can reallocate. Mr. Prana.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Your iPhone was quicker than mine, because that was going to be, I agree with you. I will, to my last breath, I'm not going to sock it to the residents. In fact, the next thing I was going to talk about is we do have that fund balance policy, and I guess I'm going to direct it to you of where we should go. Our trigger point is now 22.5%.
Well, yes, meaning what we established, I forget if it was formally or informally, and who really cares, but the general idea that the midpoint between 15 and 30, when we're over that, we get to play with that and put it to things like this.
And
Correct.
I was going to ask you if we made the trigger point 20%, since we have money in the reserves and this is the time to use it. I mean, I want to guard the reserves, but it is the residents' money. And if we move the trigger point down 2.5, and I don't have what the numbers would be for that, since we're over 30%, you're right, the sky is not falling. We don't have to do, I still think we can do a lot of these projects, and we can do it with money that we have in-house. And so I don't know where to direct. Is that, if we wanted to do 0.20, is that just something out for discussion?
That is something that
Okay.
could be discussed,
Okay,
certainly.
I just didn't know where to direct it. so.
Certainly. And I'll make a further step toward fairness that says, this is to some degree structural. So solving this year doesn't necessarily mean it's solved down the road. And so certainly there might be some things we need to do to keep the problem from recurring to this degree every year. And I won't squawk about that. I'm just saying, I'm not feeling the need to sit around here and spitball 1.4 million tonight when there's, number one, a whole second part of this discussion coming next month, and number two, an important issue that is not critical. I just don't buy the critical argument. I think it's important, but not critical. Mr. Prana.
Just a follow-up. Could staff just, quick little small staff report, if we, and I don't know if this is appropriate, 22.5, 20%, what that gives us with surplus, so that when we have that discussion next month, they would, and hopefully they will have a very good idea then, so then we have that money that you spoke about, we can talk about and how we can allocate it.
It's a fair request. I'm betting Mr. Krumstock is going to tell us that is on the way, but I think the thing that Mr. Prana is adding is that, could you make sure there's a line in there about his thought of what if we scale the midpoint back to 20%? Let him see what it looks like. Mr. Krumstock.
What I was going to mention is there is a follow-up discussion. It was more towards the budget with some additional reallocation. I know that some of you have heard me say numerous times, there are certain funds that need to have a higher fund balance, and one that we've talked about before was 911. So you will hear part of that discussion. There is some reallocation of fund balance throughout all the different funds. But no, it might not be next month, but it is part of the discussion. If I need to expedite it to July, I will, because we do have a CAFR, but that's already in play with the 2017 budget. That's already because of concerns that I have on certain funds, and also, as you've heard me, and not to keep on going, but that's the one that I'm really focusing on right now is 911, because as we've said before, that fund needs $1 million in its fund balance. In about 2.5 years, when we have an expenditure of about $500,000, that comes down very quickly. And that's why it needs $1 million, and it needs to be in that ballpark between $500,000 and $1 million. But there's some other funds that we're going to deal with, and that's part of some of the fund balance policies that we're looking at. So again, it is coming. If I'm directed that I need to expedite that, I will, but that was going to be part of the budget, just with all the pieces.
It's a fair point. So on the staff's current timeline is acceptable. I don't think there's a need to monkey with what you're doing, but just as you're preparing it, this is why we say it's always helpful when people signal their intention. As you're preparing, there's going to be at least one extra statistic that we're going to ask you to generate. Mr. Judd, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not interested in really moving from the 22.5%. That's what we, correct me if I'm right or wrong, we gauged that just so I have a clear understanding, that if, as long as the general fund balance was projected to be over 22.5%, that we would use 50% of that in the budget.
That is correct.
And just so I'm on the same page, that the the number you came up with, the 9.7, I think is what you said, is that with the additional 500 grand or million?
No,
that it's
that's
over?
already taken out. All that stuff is considered committed, I believe the
Yeah,
word is.
restricted,
Yes.
and that's 11 point something. So the 9 that's being mentioned is what we have for fund balance.
So-
Correct.
Yeah, but no, that includes the 500,000 that we were over, the million
No.
we were over this year?
It's 11
No.
million for that.
9.6 does not include the 500,000. No.
The what?
The 9.6 or 9.7 does not include the 500,000. It's in the council packet on the one page, and after the audit, it'll show you the,
So what number did you use? You used 9.7?
He's using 9.7, which
It's
is
9.67, I rounded to 9.7.
No, I know,
Right.
but what is that number exactly?
that's our
That's the-
unassigned
that's the
fund balance.
unassigned fund balance
That's
right now.
available for use.
Correct.
That's available for use?
Correct.
34.6%, and then what, yeah,
Right, and that includes the 524,000 that we're over this year, or no?
no.
no, that's all taken.
It's excluded from that. That's a committed amount that's already in the 11 million, but not in the 9.6 or
What's the
9.7
500 committed for?
for the compensated absences.
No, I'm talking about, we projected $2.1 million being over in October. We came in 3.1 million, or 3.2, so we had, if we use that same 50%,
well,
that's
okay.
500 grand.
Well, then, right, so in other words, now we have a third way of looking that is double counting some dollars.
Well, that's why I want to make sure I'm not cut
So-
up. So the 9.7 includes that 500.
Well, the answer is no and yes, that it's a third way of measuring. There's not a,
Yeah.
there's not a way to go, where's that money right now when it comes to fund balance? There just isn't.
Let me just clarify. So again, when you look at the general fund total fund balance, and I'm just reading, it's $11,459,051. Now back out the $521,452, which is the committed compensated.
Right.
Then you have the manager's hold in the 2016 budget, which is $221,683. And then you have the other $1 million that we assigned from reserves for the 2016 budget. That's that $9,671,128.
Understood, but that's still not answering Mr. Judd's question. He's talking about, so now, sort of, kind of, there's 500 grand because it wasn't what we were counting earlier, and so it's not as simple as just saying, yes, it's in there, no, it's not. It's probably some of it is and some of it isn't, is likely. And again, that's just an amateur's view of how it goes, but
No, I'm just trying to understand it because you're,
this is why these questions have to come up, so that people can actually get the answers and
well,
give it to you.
no, I'm just trying to understand because I understand your, I don't want to say argument, but your suggestion that we go from 9.7 that you had down to 30%.
Well, we have to
Right.
do that.
Right, so we've got 1.3, you said, 1.4?
Well, 1.2 roughly.
1.2. So even if we went down to 27%, we'd have another little bit of cash that we could,
Correct.
We can
And
work
so,
with.
so this is what I'm saying is, who's to say where that 500,000 is? Is it in the increment over 30? And then, oh, hey, we could say that increment over 30 doesn't include that 500,000. We could say that it does. We could say that the 9.6 includes it. We could say it doesn't. We could share it out. We're double counting some dollars and single counting others. And so that can all come out when everybody is more prepared with better numbers to discuss all that stuff.
right, I mean, because I understand your I don't want to say argument because it's not really an argument, but your suggestion that we use that capital, we need to
Well,
in some way.
Yes,
But we
it's
could
got to
use,
go to some places.
but we
Right.
could use that for the pensions as well.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
So, I
Yes,
mean,
sir.
my contention is that's ultimately a bigger animal than this from a return standpoint.
Yes,
and so
in a zero-sum either-or choice. And I'm not willing to concede that it is yet. We need to let...
no, I'm not.
numbers
I'm just saying.
flesh out.
If we've got 1.2 or whatever number you came up with 1.3, as compared to saying, we're going to put all 1.3, and I know you're not suggesting that, I'm just saying, as compared to saying 1.3 all goes here, we clear it, I'd be more interested in using the 500 or whatever to get to the, to the point where we can stay on the 2033, but use some of that cash.
Absolutely.
Is what I'm saying. So
But this discussion is not prepared for that. That's coming later. So
I understand.
let's
I'm
just
saying,
let it go.
what I'm
till
saying
later.
is I'm with you on board on that, from the 34.7 to 30, and I get that, and just trying to make sure I follow the numbers, that's all. Thank you.
Fair enough. Mr. Diastis.
Thank you. It seemed like we took a left turn on the right turn of street. The Ad hoc Capital Improvements Committee, of which I am a member, discusses and reviews capital expenditures. I have always challenged myself at that meeting not to be the person who says, but how are we going to pay for this? Rather, is this something we need this year, 2017, or can it be postponed to a future year? And I think Melissa's done a good job with her report, but I don't want members of the council to think that just because there's numbers here and it says it's been reviewed by the committee, doesn't mean that the entire committee has unanimously agreed that this is how we should spend their money in this particular year.
Fair point.
Okay, so our job at that committee level is to say, yes, we think we need to do X, Y, Z. Then it comes to this council, and our job here is to say, okay, we need to do it, how do we fund it? So, two different things. So I just don't want anybody thinking that Diastis and Veenbaas and the other members of the committee said, yeah, we agree. I had to bring them in.
Throw them in.
That's
Under the bus.
He's under the bus with me.
Tire tracks, Tim?
Mr. Veenbaas.
I want a piece of it. So that's exactly right. When we go through these numerous projects, and there are pages and pages, it's exactly that. We go through and we look at the substance. We look at the value, both for what it costs and is it something that we really need to do. And as we go through this list, it is a very, very large list, and if we really wanted to get on a whole nother tangent, we'd be talking about how many multi-millions of dollars we would need to fund every project that's on those lists, and that's obviously unrealistic. So what the intention is exactly what Mr. Diastis said. We're trying to bring to the council a realistic number of projects with some well thought put into them, and then we're not here to decide what goes up and what goes down for taxes or any increase of this or that. It's to let the council know where the projects are and what they cost, and then we decide with the overall budget, which is what we just went through, how much do you have to allocate towards this area. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you, gentlemen, for that contribution. I think it's important to keep in mind. Further discussion on item 3, local roads. Then seeing none, there are 2 requests to go into closed session this evening. They both fall under subsection C, 1 or 2. I never remember which. 2, subsection C2 of the Illinois Open Meetings Act. The first is to do union negotiations under the fire category, and second, under the police category. It does require a formal motion and a roll call vote. Is there a motion to go into closed session for
So
those 2
moved.
purposes? Mr. Prana has made the motion, and it has been seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, the question is, shall the council enter closed session for those 2 purposes? The clerk will please call the roll.
Cannon?
Yep.
Prana?
Yes.
Judd?
Yes.
Baner?
Yes.
Diastis?
No.
Veenbaas?
Yes.
5 in favor and 1 opposed. The council will now enter closed session. Members of the audience and of the press are advised that we do not expect to take any action upon returning to open session.